She stood frozen at the checkout, holding her ID, while the cashier called security, insisting it was fake. Every eye in the store turned toward her like she was a thief, not a scholarship student buying notebooks. Then came the line that shattered her. People like you don't come from Princeton. But what the cameras caught next, that changed everything. Because this time, she didn't walk out silent. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The air was too clean for Cairo Bennett to feel comfortable. The sidewalks leading up to Colton University's East Campus Hall gleamed like someone polished them hourly. Every building loomed with an arrogance that came from surviving centuries unchanged. Stone tradition and entitlement etched into their bones. Cairo paused under the massive stone archway. His sneakers, scuffed from years of city pavement, barely made a sound on the smooth path. He adjusted his backpack strap, swallowed the tension in his throat, and climbed the stairs two at a time. His first class, Calculus 2, was about to begin. The lecture hall was built like a coliseum, rising tier by tier with sleek desks and built-in monitors. He stepped inside, immediately aware of the hush his presence created. Not loud, not direct, just that subtle shift, that unnatural pause in energy. Heads tilted slightly, eyes lifted from MacBook screens. Then came the whispers. Not loud enough to catch, but loud enough to know they were about him. He chose a seat near the middle, third row from the back. Not the front, where people would assume he was trying to prove something, and not the back where they'd say he didn't care. He placed his notebook on the desk, a thick, soft-covered grid journal his mom had bought on clearance. As Cairo opened the notebook, a boy in the row behind him leaned over and muttered under his breath, not directly at him, but with full intention of being heard. Probably got in on a scholarship quota. The words slid in, like a blade disguised as a joke. Cairo didn't flinch. He didn't turn around. He had heard versions of that line since elementary school, said by substitute teachers, school counselors, and annoyed parents at chess tournaments. Always the same meaning. You don't belong. You're only here because someone made an exception. Before the sting could settle in, the lecture hall door creaked open and slammed shut behind a tall, rigid man in a navy blazer and brown slacks. He moved with the kind of controlled urgency that demanded silence. Dr. Edmund Clark, etched into legend on Rate My Professor, calm and whispered among STEM majors as both brilliant and brutal. He didn't greet the class, didn't smile, just walked to the center podium and dropped a thick folder onto the desk like a judge announcing a verdict. I'm Dr. Clark. If you're here to coast, you're in the wrong room, he said. His voice was clipped, nasal, and heavy with condescension. This is Calculus 2. We move fast. I don't slow down. And I don't repeat myself. As his eyes scanned the room, Cairo felt a brief moment of contact. It wasn't just a glance. It lingered. A flicker of something colder than indifference. A calculation. The kind of look a person gives to something unexpected. Like finding a stain on an expensive carpet. We'll start with roll. Say your name and where you're from. Loudly, the introductions began. Chase Redford, Greenwich, Connecticut. Alexis Monroe, Westchester, New York. Michael Huang, Cupertino, California. Kaitlyn Jennings, Rye. It moved quickly. Each name seemed to reinforce the same image. Wealth, suburbia, a long list of private academies and country clubs. Then, Cairo Bennett, South Los Angeles, California. Silent. Even Dr. Clark paused. He looked back down at his sheet, as if checking to see if it was a mistake. Public school? Clark asked, not out of curiosity, but with a smirk of disdain, like someone noticing a typo in a resume. Cairo held his gaze and nodded. Yes, sir. Dr. Clark raised his chin slightly. Well, Mr. Bennett, I hope you're ready to work harder than you're used to. There it was, the message layered beneath the words. You're not ready. You don't deserve to be here. You're lucky I even let you in the room. Cairo looked down at his notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and gripped his pen. He didn't respond, because he knew. He knew if he fired back, they'd call him aggressive. If he defended himself, they'd say he was overreacting. His silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Dr. Clark turned and began writing equations on the board. Long, complex derivatives. As he worked through them, his voice remained crisp, his tone unaffected. But Cairo wasn't focused on the math. Not yet. His mind was burning with something heavier than formulas. He'd always known this place wouldn't be easy. But hearing it aloud, so early, so unprovoked, cut deep. And yet, as the chalk scraped the board and the room filled with the scent of dry ink and coffee breath, something settled inside him. Not fear, not shame, but purpose. He wasn't going anywhere. Still, just before the lecture ended, Dr. Clark paused mid-problem, turned around slowly, and looked directly at Cairo. His voice dropped in volume, almost casual, but the intent sliced through the room. Try to keep up. Don't waste my time. Cairo didn't blink, didn't flinch, but the girl next to him turned just slightly, eyes narrowing. She'd noticed it too. And as the rest of the class began packing up, Dr. Clark's stare lingered, far too long. Because behind those cold eyes, it wasn't just doubt, it was fear, as if somehow Cairo already knew the answers to questions Clark hadn't asked yet. The morning after Calculus 2, Cairo sat alone in the dining commons, with a half-eaten bagel and his notebook open beside him. Pages filled with margin-to-margin calculations. Dense, meticulous, elegant. His mind was already solving Clark's next problem, before most of the class had even copied yesterday's notes. But brilliance didn't draw conversation here. Not from these students. Not from this world. A group of boys in Colton Crew sweatshirts walked past his table, laughing too loudly. One of them pointed to Cairo's page as they passed and said, "Yo, man's out here solving rocket science before breakfast. That's that hood hustle." The others cracked up, never breaking stride. Cairo didn't look up. The joke wasn't meant for him to respond to anyway. Later that day, he stood waiting for the dorm elevator, when a girl in yoga pants stepped off and looked him over like he didn't belong in the building. "You lost?" she asked, tucking her AirPods into their case. Cairo blinked, confused. "No. I live here." "Oh." She gave a tight-lipped smile. "I just thought, never mind." Back in his dorm, Cairo's roommate, Reed, was blasting indie rock and gaming on his 4K monitor. The room was divided, not physically but in function. Reed's half was a shrine to expensive distractions, designer sneakers, mechanical keyboards, posters of artists Cairo had never heard of. Cairo's half was books, a thrifted desk lamp, and a small framed photo of his mother by the window. Reed glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. "Yo, you joining the intramural league? Heard they need more athletes." Cairo shook his head. "I'm not on the team. I'm here for math." Reed looked surprised. "Oh, right. Cool, man. Cool." That was the first week, and it only sharpened from there. In calculus, group assignments began. Cairo was paired with Chase Redford, Tina Klein, and Andrew Loam. Tina, the unofficial lead, immediately took charge, assigning problems like a manager distributing chores. When Cairo offered his approach to a limit problem, Tina responded with a tight smile and said, "Let's keep it simple. We don't want to overcomplicate it." 5 minutes later, Andrew suggested the exact same method. This time, Tina nodded. "Yeah, that works." Cairo didn't say anything. He just kept writing. When the final solutions were submitted, most of the group's answers were his. They just weren't credited to him. He was the ghost mathematician. That night, Cairo stayed in the library, long after the lights dimmed. In a far corner of the math wing, there was a forgotten chalkboard room. It smelled like old paper and chalk dust, and the radiator hissed like it was annoyed. It was perfect. He stood in front of the board, headphones in, hoodie up. He wasn't listening to music, just silence on loop, a tactic to shut out everything else. He worked through Clark's unsolved examples, one by one. His hands moved faster than most could follow, filling the board with elegant proofs, reworked integrals, even correcting small errors in the textbook. Every night, it was the same ritual. Solve, erase, repeat, as if proving it to the walls would eventually make the people believe it too. By the end of the second week, Clark announced a pop quiz. No calculators, no notes, 20 minutes. Cairo's pen never paused. The room was mostly silent, broken only by the occasional shuffle of papers and whispered curses. Clark watched from the front, perched like a hawk, eyes trailing Cairo more than anyone else. When the bell rang, Cairo handed in his paper first, finished with time to spare. Clark glanced at it as he took it, giving nothing away. The next day, quizzes were returned face down. Clark walked the aisles methodically, laying each one with a sharp slap on the desk. Cairo waited, heartbeat steady. He knew he got them right. There wasn't a single doubt in his mind. Finally, Clark dropped his paper in front of him. Cairo flipped it over. 0. The red ink bled across the top like a wound. He blinked. Looked again. There was no feedback. No corrections. Just a big, angry 0 circled in thick strokes. He raised his hand. Clark glanced over. Problem, Mr. Bennett. I'd like to know why I received a 0. Clark walked slowly toward him. I didn't recognize the solution method. It wasn't the one I taught. Cairo stared at him. But it's correct. That's debatable. You'll need to prove you didn't copy it from an outside source. Clark's voice lowered. Then where did you get it? Cairo felt the room watching. The silence wasn't quiet. It was pointed. I derived it myself. I used a substitution shortcut. It's standard. Clark raised an eyebrow. Standard. Where you're from. The words echoed like a slap. Even a few students shifted in their seats. Cairo didn't respond. He simply folded the paper, slid it into his notebook, and sat back in his chair. That night, he returned to the chalkboard room. But this time, something was different. He couldn't focus. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote, and he kept erasing the same line of calculus over and over. Not because it was wrong, but because his brain wouldn't let him move past it. Where you're from. The phrase infected everything. It reminded him of every time a teacher told him to slow down in high school, of the science fair where the judges asked if someone helped him with his project, of the scholarship application where he had to write an essay about overcoming adversity just to get considered. He sat down on the floor back against the radiator and let the quiet press into him. He didn't cry, he didn't rage, but something inside him locked in. This wasn't just about math anymore. It never had been. He pulled his notebook out, flipped to a blank page, and wrote in large block letters, I will be undeniable. The next morning, Cairo walked into class early, head high, paper in hand, ready to challenge his 0. But before he could speak, he overheard Clark whispering to the TA, keep an eye on Bennett. His work doesn't match his background. And just like that, it wasn't just a grade. It was an accusation. Cairo stared at the note in his hand for what felt like minutes, though only seconds had passed. The words bled through the paper with urgency, written in tight, jagged cursive. Someone had written it fast, possibly scared, possibly angry, or both. The next morning, Cairo showed up early to Clark's office hours. He didn't knock, the door was already open. The hallway was quiet. The click of his sneakers the only sound as he stepped inside. Clark sat behind his desk reading a copy of The Atlantic. One leg crossed over the other, tea steaming beside him. Clark looked up and barely acknowledged him. Mr. Bennett. Professor Clark, Cairo said evenly, placing his quiz and a copy of the summer answer key on the desk. Clark didn't reach for either. Back again? Cairo gestured to the papers. I found this in the discard bin in the library. It's your summer quiz answer key. It matches my submission. Clark finally glanced down. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, just for a moment, then vanished. Interesting, he said. It's word for word, even the substitution steps. Cairo continued. You said you didn't recognize my method, but it's your method. Identical. Clark leaned back slowly. Perhaps you saw the key before. I didn't. You're sure? I'm positive. Clark gave a small, deliberate nod, the kind that pretends to be listening but is really stalling for time. Maybe it was left out by accident. You found it in a bin, you say. How long did you look through the trash before you found something useful? Cairo didn't rise to the bait. The point is, I didn't cheat. You said the solution was too advanced to come from me. But clearly, I understood it the same way you did. Or, Clark said with the faintest smirk, you understood it because of me. The insinuation landed heavy. Cairo held the silence. I'd like the plagiarism flag removed from my record, he said finally. Clark waved a hand. There's no official charge, just a note to observe. Standard practice. But that note affects my record. It changes how people see me. Clark tapped his pen against the desk. You're overreacting. Cairo's voice dropped. I'm responding. Look, Clark said, now folding his arms. You're clearly intelligent. But intelligence doesn't always come with discipline or honesty. Sometimes the two don't coexist. Clark leaned forward, lowering his voice. Mr. Bennett, I don't owe you a debate. You're not on trial here. I'm your professor. You came from a background that doesn't always prepare students for rigor like this. I'm trying to guide you, but if you insist on making everything about race or injustice, you're going to alienate yourself. And that's not my doing. That's on you. Cairo clenched his jaw. He wasn't even surprised anymore. Just exhausted. The game was always the same. Deny, deflect, diminish. And yet Clark's office was a carousel of smiles and laughter every time Cairo walked by. He had seen it last week. A white girl named Lauren had forgotten the chain rule entirely during a problem set. Clark had chuckled, walked her through the solution line by line, and even asked about her spring break plans. The contrast was sharp, deliberate. Cairo got cold scrutiny. She got mentorship. As he stood to leave, Clark added, almost as an afterthought, "My door is open if you ever want help. But you have to trust the process." Cairo turned, eyes steely. Maybe the process isn't broken. Maybe it's working exactly as it was designed to. He left without waiting for a response. Outside, the hallway was quiet. Cairo leaned against the wall, trying to calm his breath. His fists were clenched tight around the quiz paper again. Crumpled now. Behind the polite civility of their exchange, a war was being fought. One where smiles concealed sabotage, and gatekeeping wore the mask of professionalism. Cairo's next class was in McKenna Hall, a glass-walled economics building, filled with sunlit lounges and Ivy League ambition. He walked in feeling like an imposter again, not because he didn't belong, but because he wasn't allowed to belong comfortably. After class, while gathering his notes, he overheard a familiar voice behind him. "Bennett's got a chip on his shoulder." Cairo paused. The voice came from the faculty lounge, door slightly ajar. He crept closer. "Clark's been saying he's not going to last the semester," said another voice. Male, older, white. "Well, he's intense," said someone else. "But these kids, some of them come in thinking everything's a slight." Clark's voice returned, calm and clear. "It's not personal, but this one, he walks in expecting to be treated differently. The moment you call them out, they play the race card." Cairo's breath hitched. "I'm keeping an eye on him," Clark added. "Too much confidence for where he came from. It never ends well." Laughter. Short, cruel, final. Cairo stepped back from the door and walked down the hall, each step echoing louder than the last. That wasn't just a professor with bias. That was a man protecting a system. And the system spoke in code. Where he came from, race card, too much confidence. All of it carefully constructed to seem neutral, academic, but weaponized just the same. Back in his dorm, Cairo dropped his bag and stared at the wall. The room was quiet. Even Reed wasn't home. For the first time, he let the weight settle. He wasn't being paranoid. He was being hunted. Not for anything he did wrong, but for the threat of being too right. He sat at his desk, pulled out the quiz and the answer key, then unfolded the note again. "He's doing it again. Don't let him." Cairo opened his laptop, fingers trembling over the keyboard. He created a new email draft, addressed to the university ombudsman. Before he could type, a new email popped into his inbox. Subject: confidential follow-up. Prefix: Clark. From anonymous student. The message read, The hallway outside Dr. Clark's office felt colder than the rest of East Campus. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, as Cairo stood there, gripping his quiz paper like it was evidence in a trial. Students passed him, some glancing, others ignoring, but no one stopped. That was the theme of his weeks at Culton: quiet distance, subtle dismissal. The number 0 in red marker still stared back at him like an accusation. Not a grade. There were no comments, no feedback, no sign of error. And Cairo knew, not guessed, not hoped, knew the work was flawless. At 3:02 p.m., the office door creaked open. "Mr. Bennett," Dr. Clark said flatly, standing in the doorway. His office behind him looked like a scene from a 1960s academic film. Towering shelves, untouched leather-bound books, and a chalkboard still half smeared from a forgotten lecture. Cairo stepped inside, clutching his quiz. Clark sat behind the desk, not offering a seat. "Well," Cairo laid the paper down gently, "I'd like to understand why I received a 0. There were no mistakes on this." "It's a standard substitution technique," Cairo said, careful with his tone. "It's covered in most advanced calculus references. It simplifies the chain rule." Clark leaned back, folding his hands over his chest. "And where did you learn this?" "Online. Independent study. I practiced with advanced problem sets over the summer." A beat of silence. Then Clark chuckled. It wasn't friendly. "This level of clarity doesn't just come out of nowhere," he said. "Not from someone with your background." Cairo's jaw tensed. "What background is that?" Clark didn't answer directly. Instead, he gave a small shrug. the kind that dismissed both the question and the person asking it. "You're suggesting I cheated," Cairo said quietly. "I'm saying," Clark replied, "that this work is inconsistent with your profile. Students don't leap from basic public education to intuitive advanced methods in 2 weeks. Unless," he smiled faintly, "they've seen the solutions ahead of time." Cairo's stomach sank. He felt like the floor had shifted. "Do you have proof?" Clark's voice turned cool. "It's my word. That's proof enough." There it was, the full weight of institutional confidence. A system that had trained men like Clark to believe they didn't need evidence, just suspicion. And that suspicion was enough when it was directed at someone like Cairo. Cairo picked up the paper and nodded. "Thank you for your time, Professor." Clark barely looked up as Cairo walked out, but the storm had already begun. That night, in his dorm room, Cairo stared at the ceiling for hours. The math wasn't the hard part. The hard part was knowing that truth didn't matter here, not unless someone already believed you deserved it. And Clark never would. His mind had already been made. Cairo opened his laptop and started pulling resources. Old quiz templates, archived student forums, anything tied to Clark's previous tests. He wanted to see how many other students had used similar methods, or whether his work had really been as unique as Clark claimed. Around 2 a.m., while the campus slept, Cairo slipped into the library's basement level. He knew Clark taught summer courses, and had an office policy of discarding outdated tests after each term, many of which ended up in the library's unsecured copy room bins. It was risky. Not illegal, but definitely discouraged. The lights flickered as he stepped into the storage area near the old printer stacks. The air was thick with paper dust and forgotten knowledge. Most of the recycling bins were filled with torn syllabi and outdated course outlines. Then, at the bottom of one box, he spotted a manila envelope, labeled Kale C2. He opened it slowly. Inside were copies of last term's pop quizzes, multiple versions. Most were scratched up with student notes, incomplete. But one was pristine. Clark's original answer key. Step by step, line by line, the exact same shortcut substitution, the same layout, even the same choice of variables. His own work wasn't just similar, it matched the instructor's key. He stood there frozen, the paper in his hands like a ticking bomb. Cairo's mind raced. Why would Clark claim his method was unrecognizable if it was his own solution? And then it hit him. The reason wasn't logic. It was protection. Clark hadn't expected him to use that method, and once he did, the only plausible explanation in Clark's mind wasn't talent. It was theft, and the easiest way to shut it down was to erase the grade, and then erase the student. Cairo folded the key gently, slid it into a protective sheet, and tucked it in the back of his notebook. He had proof now, but proof was only powerful if someone was willing to believe it. There, under the academic notes section, was a new entry dated yesterday. Student's quiz solution, inconsistent with expected methods. Flagged for possible academic dishonesty. Under review. Prof. Edmund Clark. A second note appeared, this one marked private. To Dean Elias Merriweather. From E. Clark. Subject, plagiarism risk. K. Bennett. Cairo's chest tightened. He read the brief paragraph again and again. Student submitted a quiz using methods not discussed in class. Unusual sophistication raises concern about unauthorized assistance or prior access to materials. Request informal observation during future assessments. Clark. Informal observation. They were watching him now. Not because he was wrong, but because he was too right. Cairo leaned back, fists clenched on the desk. Outside, the campus was silent. Inside, his future was under threat, not by failure but by a man who feared what his success might reveal. But the twist hadn't happened yet, because tucked inside Clark's discarded envelope was something else. A handwritten note, folded once, addressed to whom it may concern. Cairo unfolded it and froze. It read, "If this lands in your hands, he's doing it again. Don't let him." A former student. The basement of the library smelled like dust and forgotten ambition. Concrete walls, flickering fluorescent light, rows of old cabinets filled with archives no one read anymore. Cairo stood by the back stacks, watching the minute hand tick toward 9. But no one came. 9 passed, then 9:10. The silence thickened, and the anonymous email, just like the message scribbled in the envelope, suddenly felt less like help, more like a warning. Or a trap. Cairo slipped out the side door without being seen. As he walked back toward the dorms, something shifted in him. Not a break, Not anger, but clarity. These people didn't know him, not the truth of him. They only saw his skin, his silence, his presence in a space that wasn't built for him. They had no idea how long he'd been playing this game. The bell had just rung, but Cairo stayed behind in room 214, wiping down the whiteboard with the sleeve of his hoodie. Miss Tran had given him a few extra minutes to finish his model before the other students came in for fifth period. On the board was a set of matrices and handwritten notes, a linear regression built around predicting bus arrival times using LA Metro's delayed data feeds and public traffic sensors. He was sick, and the math wasn't the impressive part. What mattered was why he built it. Kids in his neighborhood were being marked tardy over and over again, missing first period because buses came late, or didn't come at all. Teachers blamed the kids. The administration shrugged, but Cairo had noticed a pattern. So he built the math around it. He wrote a Python script, borrowed an old laptop from the STEM club, and within 2 weeks had a basic dashboard that could forecast which lines would be late, based on day, weather, and past trends. The principal never mentioned his name in the morning announcements. But the tool showed up the next semester, repackaged with a new name, used by the district. Cairo didn't even get a thank you. Back then, he didn't care. He wasn't chasing praise. He was chasing precision. That same year, his math teacher, Mr. Warner, convinced him to enter the Southern California Regional Math Bowl, a private school-heavy competition known for elite prep kids and cutthroat judging. Cairo showed up in a hand-me-down blazer and Vans, the only public school student in the top-tier division. Round 2 featured a multivariable optimization puzzle, a problem intended to stump all but the top finalists. Cairo solved it in his head in under 6 minutes. When he raised his hand and handed in his answer sheet, the proctor gave him a confused look. He nodded once. Calm, quiet. 20 minutes later, he was disqualified. Suspicious conduct, they said. Possible prior access to the problems. Mr. Warner filed a complaint that went nowhere. Maybe they're just not ready for you, he said in the car ride home. But one day, they won't be able to ignore you. Cairo didn't answer. He just stared out the window, heart bruised but not broken. That night, he worked through all the remaining problems in the packet, not to prove he could, just to know. He'd always been that way. Not loud, not desperate to impress, but obsessed with mastery. Back in present day, Cairo sat cross-legged in the library's chalkboard room again. The same one where he hid most nights. Only this time, he wasn't solving Clark's problems. He was building a new one. The flyer was posted in every department. Carlton Mines Annual Math Challenge, a campus-wide open competition. Winner gets $5,000, research lab access, and a mentorship with a top faculty mathematician. It was hosted by Clark's department. Cairo knew what that meant. Visibility. Cameras. Faculty panelists. Students watching live. It also meant exposure. If he entered as himself, every answer he gave would be picked apart, scrutinized, dismissed. But if he came in with a blank slate, that changed everything. He reached into his backpack, tore out a fresh page, and began filling out the online application. Under name, he typed KB Reynolds, an alias, a version of himself untouched by bias. Then, under academic year, he selected non-declared. When the submission form asked for a short statement of interest, he typed, "Mathematics speaks when we're not allowed to." He paused, then hit submit. For the first time in weeks, Cairo smiled. He wasn't playing defense anymore. He was making his move. 3 days later, Clark stood at the front of the campus forum, reading through the early submission pool for the math challenge. One caught his eye. He stared at the solution, a proof constructed with such clarity, elegance, and innovation that he had to reread it twice. His lips parted. Then he checked the submission ID. No name, just initials. K. Clark frowned. Somewhere inside, a familiar unease began to rise. It started with a blank page. No lines, no grids, just silence and space. The kind Cairo Bennett had come to cherish. He sat cross-legged in the chalkboard room, fluorescent light humming above him like a pulse. It was just past 2 a.m. The university grounds outside were silent, washed in navy shadows. Everyone else was asleep. But Cairo wasn't like everyone else. This time, he wasn't solving someone else's question. He was writing his own legacy. But Cairo wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to redefine. He chose a notoriously slippery problem, a multivariable limit, involving a divergent vector field, the kind of problem even seasoned researchers debated. But instead of approaching it the traditional way, Cairo restructured it entirely, treating it like a fractal, solving the convergence through transformation rather than reduction. He moved like a composer, each stroke of chalk a musical note. Step by step, every variable danced into place. What others would solve in 20 pages, Cairo reduced into a clean 7-step proof. He stared at it for almost an hour once he finished, not checking for errors. There weren't any. Just absorbing it. It was more than a solution. It was an argument, a quiet declaration. You will see me, even if you don't know it's me yet. At the top of the submission, under name, he typed the same initials, KB Reynolds. No school, no background, just ideas. By 4:00 a.m., it was uploaded, and he vanished back into the silence. 2 days later, inside the mathematics department's conference room, the first batch of anonymous submissions was laid out in front of the judging panel. 7 professors, 1 guest researcher from MIT, and Dr. Edmund Clark himself. The judges flipped through the entries without much ceremony. Most were competent. A few were clever, but none truly stood out, until Professor Marin, the visiting scholar, suddenly paused. Wait, she said, squinting at a particular submission. She flipped back to the first page, and then reread the entire solution, her mouth tightening with quiet disbelief. Whose is this? She asked. No one answered. The entry was marked only by a number, and the initials KBR. Clark reached for it. He scanned the proof. Brow furrowed. Then he stopped halfway through the 3rd step. His eyes narrowed. He read it again. And again. This, he muttered, is exceptional. Professor Marin leaned forward. You recognize the method. Clark hesitated. The proof used a rare inversion technique, one he'd only ever seen applied by a handful of professionals. It wasn't just clever, it was precise. Too precise. It read like something forged in solitude, under pressure, by someone who didn't just know the rules, but resented them. It's not undergraduate level, Clark finally said. Not even close. Marin raised an eyebrow. You think it's plagiarized? No, Clark replied, too quickly. No, it's original. But it's unorthodox. Marin smiled. Unorthodox is what we want, Edmund. Clark didn't smile back, because buried beneath his analytical admiration was something else. Fear. It was the same feeling he'd had in his office that day, when Cairo laid the summer key in front of him like a mirror. That flash of exposure, of something slipping out of his grip. Clark read the final line again. QED, elegantly reduced. Structurally sound. No shortcuts. He looked at the initials again. Coincidence? Or correction? Word spread quickly around the department. Whispers in hallways. Forwarded emails. Mentions in staff lounges. Have you seen the KB proof? It's not just good. It's unreal. Whoever it is, they're not just a student. They're something else. Some called it unprecedented. Others said it felt too clean. But no one could deny it. The proof had power. Clark knew he couldn't disqualify it. Not without drawing attention. And if he tried to question its authenticity now, after weeks of flagging Cairo as suspicious, the backlash would be hard to contain. So he did the only thing he could. He stayed quiet until the email arrived. Subject: We'd like you to announce the winner. From Event Committee Chair to Dr. Edmund Clark. Since the highest-rated submission came through your department, and given your tenure, we'd like you to present the winner live on stage at the symposium. As always, anonymity will be lifted after the award is read aloud. Clark sat frozen in front of his monitor, staring at the message. He knew the initials. He knew the math. He just didn't know the face he'd have to confront. The day of the announcement arrived with fanfare, posters, cameras, dozens of students, professors and alumni packed into the lecture theater for the annual Colton Mines showcase. Cairo stood in the back, hood up, notebook under his arm. No one paid him attention. He looked like any other curious freshman. On stage, the panelists spoke one by one. Speeches about innovation, about the next generation of thinkers, about math as language, as truth. Then Clark stepped to the podium. He cleared his throat, clutching the card in his hand like it might burn him. The winner of this year's Colton Mines Challenge, he began, voice dry, is a student whose work the committee unanimously described as unparalleled. A hush fell. He continued. The submission was detailed, original, and displayed a level of abstraction rarely seen, even among graduate-level scholars. We are proud to welcome this voice into our community. Read the name, and froze. From the back of the room, Cairo took one step forward as Clark's voice caught in his throat. The name on the card, K.B. Reynolds. And for a split second before Clark could speak, his eyes locked with Cairo's across the auditorium. Recognition flickered. But of a challenge returned. Dr. Clark stared down at the name on the announcement card like it was written in another language. His mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. The microphone, already active, picked up the faint shuffle of paper and the awkward silence that followed. From the back of the lecture hall, Cairo stood motionless. The crowd leaned in, sensing something strange. Clark cleared his throat. The winner of the 2025 Calton Mines Challenge. He paused, eyes flicking up for a half second, landing directly on Cairo, who had now begun walking slowly down the aisle. He didn't say the last name, just the initials. The crowd hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Cairo reached the bottom of the stairs, notebook still under his arm. A subtle breeze from the stage fans moved his hoodie just enough to reveal his face. He stepped up one foot, then the next, until he was standing on the same stage where Clark stood still as stone. Gasps didn't echo, they whispered. A few students in the front row blinked in disbelief. Others glanced around, as if trying to understand what was happening. Cairo didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just looked at Clark. And Clark recoiled. It was subtle, just a half step backward, like someone seeing a shadow they weren't ready to confront. But everyone on stage saw it. Clark turned the card over in his hand. There must be some mistake, he said, microphone still on. I don't believe this submission matches this student's experience level. A murmur rolled across the auditorium. The panel of professors seated at the long table exchanged glances. Professor Marin raised an eyebrow and leaned forward toward her mic. It's his submission, Edmund, she said flatly. We confirmed it this morning. Clark kept his eyes on Cairo, his voice dropping but still just loud enough for the audience to catch. You've made quite a habit of these surprises. Cairo didn't respond. He didn't need to. His presence was the rebuttal.
K.B. Reynolds, he said. Please stay after for verification.
Marin cut him off. That's unnecessary. Clark turned, forcing a professional smile, and leaned toward her. We need to ensure this wasn't misattributed. Are you questioning the panel's credibility? Marin asked. No, I'm questioning the sudden emergence of genius from someone who spent most of the term under review. The word review landed like a slap. Eyes darted. Cairo stood still, his chest rising, a tremor barely suppressed beneath his composed face. Not because Cairo broke the rules, but because he followed them better than anyone else. The dean, seated 2 rows back, leaned forward. Dr. Clark, he said, voice sharp, please present the award. Clark hesitated. Then, slowly, he placed the certificate back onto the podium. I'll need a few minutes to verify something, he said, turning away from the mic. Marin stood up from the judge's table. With all due respect, you will do no such thing. This student has outperformed every other submission. Let him have his moment. Clark turned back to Cairo. If this is really yours, Mr. Bennett, then congratulations. But don't expect applause from those of us who've seen how this institution can be gamed. Cairo stepped forward, finally speaking. I didn't ask for applause. He picked up the certificate. I earned it. The crowd didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. But the silence felt different now. Not the silence of disbelief, the silence of revelation. Somewhere in that stillness, something cracked, not in Clark but in the illusion he had protected for so long. Still, even as Cairo held the certificate in hand, Clark's face twisted not into fury but strategy. Mr. Bennett, he said calmly, before you walk away, we'll need a handwriting match. What? Clark pointed to the original submission. To maintain fairness, all winners must confirm authorship. Since yours was anonymous, we'll require you to reproduce a sample portion of the proof, right now in front of the panel. Marin turned to him, eyes narrowing. That's never been part of the protocol. Perhaps it should be, Clark said. Given the stakes, it wasn't about fairness. It was about humiliation. A public demand to prove, again, that he belonged. Clark handed Cairo a marker. If it's yours, this should be easy. Cairo looked at the marker. Then at the board behind the stage. He nodded once, walked slowly to the whiteboard. His hands didn't shake. His lines were clean. He recreated the proof, step by step in front of a room full of people trained not to see him. But this time, they couldn't look away. When he finished, he turned to Clark. Anything else? Clark didn't speak. Because the panel was already rising to its feet, one by one. Professor Marin was the first to clap. Then a few students.
Then more.
Until the whole room echoed, not with thunderous ovation, but something better. Recognition. And yet, as Cairo stepped down from the stage, certificate in hand, a sharp whisper met Clark's ear from someone in the audience. Someone he hadn't seen enter. A man in a brown coat. Low hat. Older, quiet. He leaned in just enough for Clark to hear. He's not the only one watching you now. When he picked up, the voice on the other end was calm. Firm. This is Devonte Briggs. He did the same thing to me. You've got 5 minutes? I've got files. Monday morning arrived with a strange, muted buzz across Calton's math department. Not one official statement had been released about the competition, but word had traveled anyway, through group chats, whispered hallway conversations, and side-eyed glances in lecture halls. Under an alias, in Clark's own backyard. Some called it bold, others called it deceitful, but everyone had an opinion, and none of them said a word to his face. Cairo walked into Calculus 2, just before the bell, expecting what he always did: silence, tension, the low-grade hum of suspicion. But what greeted him today was different. A note, taped to his usual seat. Seats reserved for those who follow instructions. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Dr. Clark stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, gaze deliberately fixed on the board. He didn't acknowledge Cairo as he entered. Cairo looked at the note again, then at Clark. He didn't move. He simply walked past his usual row and took a seat in the very back, in the far corner, the only desk without a built-in monitor. The message was clear. You might have won the battle, but you're not welcome in the war. When Clark finally spoke, his voice was clipped and tight. Due to recent disruptions and inappropriate breaches of protocol during the university's math showcase, he began, we will be re-establishing classroom order. Some seating adjustments will reflect behavioral concerns. Cairo sat frozen. There were no names mentioned, no direct accusation, just coded language, enough to send a signal, but not enough to trigger a formal complaint. The students followed Clark's lead. They looked over their shoulders occasionally, glancing back at Cairo like he was radioactive. Some with pity, others with smug indifference. A few, Chase Redford among them, smirked. The room had shifted again. Clark continued with the lecture, but his examples were slower, more rigid. He refused to make eye contact with Cairo, even when Cairo raised his hand to correct an error in one of the proofs. Clark ignored it completely, calling instead on a student who hadn't even been paying attention. At one point, the TA, Nadia, a soft-spoken PhD student, approached Cairo after class. I saw what happened last week, she said, keeping her voice low. Yeah. She hesitated. You were brilliant, but you might want to lay low for a while. Cairo stared at her. I'm serious, she said. He's not going to forget this, and people are watching now. You don't want to make it worse for yourself. Worse for myself? Cairo repeated, his voice calm but heavy. I just mean, I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I played the game by the rules. He didn't like the outcome. I know, but Clark's been here 27 years. He's respected, tenured. If you push too hard, you think I should disappear? Nadia didn't answer. She just gave him a small, helpless look and walked away. Cairo sat in that silence for a long time after. He knew what was happening. It wasn't just about him. It was about protecting a hierarchy, about punishing the one who disrupted it. Not because he broke the rules, but because he played better than he was supposed to. That week, Cairo noticed his assignments took longer to be graded. When he finally did get them back, they were marked with vague comments, incomplete reasoning, too concise, recheck logic. Yet the answers were correct. And slowly the room around him became colder, louder in its silence. No one asked him to join their study group. When he tried to sit at a shared table in the commons, students gathered their things quietly and left. He was being erased. Again. But this time, they were doing it in daylight. One afternoon, while reviewing proofs in the library, he received an email. Subject: Notice of Scheduled Academic Integrity Review. From Dean Elias Merriweather. Time Friday. Note: You are requested to attend a formal review regarding inconsistencies raised about your submission to the Calton Minds Challenge. Failure to appear will result in an automatic hold on your academic record. Cairo stared at the screen. Inconsistencies. It wasn't enough that he proved his intelligence. Now they needed him to prove it again. This time behind closed doors, where no one could watch the rules bend. He called the number listed in the email. A receptionist answered. "Hi, I'm calling about the integrity review." "Yes," she said. "You're Cairo Bennett?" "I am." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," she said cautiously. "You'll be meeting with Dean Merriweather and a representative from the Academic Ethics Board. Can I ask what the specific concern is?" "I'm not authorized to say, but the review is informal at this stage." Cairo exhaled slowly. "Right." He hung up and just sat there. In the back of his mind, he remembered Devonte Briggs's voice from the night before. "He did the same thing to me. You've got 5 minutes? I've got files." He hadn't called him back yet. Maybe it was time. Cairo pulled out his notebook and opened to the page with the original note, the one he'd found in Clark's trash. "If this lands in your hands, he's doing it again. Don't let him." They were trying to make him invisible. But this time they weren't just erasing him from a classroom. They were aiming to erase his future. At 9:57 a.m. Friday, Cairo sat outside the dean's office. The door opened, and Dr. Clark stepped out. He looked prepared, and he wasn't alone. Cairo's heart skipped once, because the badge on his lapel read, University Legal Affairs. The door clicked shut behind him. Cairo stepped into the beige-paneled conference room, where the air was too still, too conditioned, like it had been filtered of truth before anyone arrived. A long rectangular table stood at the center, surrounded by 7 chairs. 5 were occupied. He recognized 2 faces immediately. Dr. Edmund Clark, who sat stiffly on the right side, and Dean Elias Merriweather, seated at the head of the table. The other 3 were unfamiliar, gray suits, distant eyes, and expressions already settled somewhere between doubt and politeness. The man with the legal affairs badge stood at the corner, clipboard resting against his chest like a shield. "Mr. Bennett," the dean began, not looking up from his tablet. "Thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." Cairo sat across from Clark, spine straight, notebook in hand. He said nothing. Not yet. Dean Merriweather tapped a few keys before continuing. "This is an informal academic integrity review regarding your submission to the Colton Mines Challenge." Cairo waited. "We are not conducting a formal investigation," the dean added quickly, "but given recent concerns and the nature of the work submitted, the university is obliged to examine consistency in academic progression." "You understand?" "Not really," Cairo replied evenly. "Could you clarify what recent concerns means?" Clark leaned forward. "We're referring to a series of discrepancies between your known academic record and the sophistication of your anonymous submission." "You mean the one that won?" Clark ignored the question. "Your early coursework, while strong, didn't indicate familiarity with graduate-level techniques. Yet the submission demonstrated mastery of complex proof structures. It's anomalous." There it was. The phrase that coded racism and professionalism. Anomalous intellectual trajectory. Cairo looked around the table. "So, let me get this straight. I solved the problem too well, and that's the issue," Dean Merriweather interjected. "We're simply seeking clarification on how and when you acquired the knowledge used in that proof. Was it self-taught? Did you work with a tutor? Was there any external guidance?" "I've been studying advanced methods on my own since high school," Cairo said. "No tutor, no access, just practice and research. I've logged hundreds of hours in the library. You can check the swipe data." "Library access doesn't verify authorship," Clark said quietly. "And neither does bias," Cairo shot back, eyes locked on him. "But that hasn't stopped you from questioning mine since day one." The table stiffened. Dean Merriweather cleared his throat. "Let's keep this constructive." The man from legal finally spoke. "Mr. Bennett, the committee is not accusing you directly of plagiarism, but we are concerned with patterns that appear inconsistent." Cairo leaned forward now, voice low, controlled. "Patterns like what? That I'm not supposed to be this good at math? That I don't come from a prep school? That I don't fit the profile of the student who usually wins these things?" Because the truth didn't require one. Finally, one of the unfamiliar professors, a woman with a silver bob haircut and a Yale pin on her collar, spoke up. "In your own words, Mr. Bennett, why didn't you enter the competition under your real name?" Cairo held her gaze. "Because I knew exactly what would happen if I did." Silence. She nodded, almost acknowledging it, then said nothing else. Dean Merriweather scribbled something on his tablet. "Thank you. We've heard enough for today. You'll be notified of the outcome within 24 hours. Cairo stood slowly. Do I get a copy of this transcript? The legal affairs man shook his head. Internal documentation only. Of course it was. As Cairo exited the room, he didn't feel defeated. He felt documented, filed, boxed, and labeled before he ever spoke. By the next morning, the decision was in. Subject: academic status notification. From Office of Student Records. Mr. Bennett, following review by the Academic Integrity Committee, you are being placed on academic probation pending further evaluation. You may continue classes but will be restricted from participating in any campus competitions, research labs, or honors projects until the probation is lifted. No mention of wrongdoing. No proof. Just consequence. The news traveled quietly, but quickly, and with it came more distance, more stares, a few sympathetic glances from undergrads, but mostly silence. In calculus, Cairo noticed his desk had been removed altogether from the back row. Clerk didn't acknowledge him at all during lecture. Not even when he answered questions. Especially when he answered questions. At lunch he sat alone. At night, he walked circles around the campus loop just to stay out of his own head. Then came the twist he didn't see coming. As he walked past the East Science Building, a low voice called from behind him. Mr. Bennett. Cairo turned. An older man stood beneath the overhang, pushing a mop cart. Uniformed. Slouched. Familiar face. It was the janitor he'd seen in Clark's building every morning. Always silent. Always cleaning before sunrise. He nodded toward the side hallway. Got something for you. Cairo followed him inside, past the door marked maintenance access only. Inside, the janitor pulled out a sealed file folder from beneath the sink. Wrapped in plastic. Name's Harold, he said finally. Been here 20 years. Cairo took the folder, confused. What is this? Cairo opened the file. Dozens of pages. Memos. Meeting logs. Course withdrawals. Recommendations denied. All with one name in common at the bottom. E. Clark. Harold looked away, eyes sharp with memory. You're not the first. Cairo clutched the folder tight. It never had been. Harold looked him in the eye. But if you want to be the last, you'll need more than proof. He pointed to one document tucked in the back. Cairo unfolded it. It was a withdrawn appeal letter, dated 8 years ago, signed Devonte Briggs. And at the bottom, scrawled in faint pencil, he buried me. Don't let him do it again. The folder felt heavier than it looked. Cairo walked back to his dorm through the side paths, where no one would stop him or ask questions. The street lamps cast long, slow-moving shadows on the cracked pavement, and his mind raced with every step. Mr. Harold's voice echoed behind the buzz of his thoughts. You're not the first. Inside, he dropped his bag, locked the door, and sat at his desk. The campus outside was sleeping, but Cairo was wide awake. He opened the file. The first page was an internal memo, dated 7 years ago. Subject line, concerning Math 204 midterm. E. Clark. The language was professional, sterile, but the content was damning. A black student had been flagged for inconsistent performance patterns after scoring unusually high on a midterm. No proof of cheating, no evidence of misconduct, just flat. The notes in the margins, handwritten and slanted, were clearly Clark's. Too abrupt of an improvement. May require additional scrutiny. Cairo flipped the page. A second file, a final grade dispute, also involving a student of color. This one was even more blatant. The student had requested a review of their final exam after receiving a failing grade. The notes read, despite seemingly accurate calculations, solution methods suggest external help. No regrade warranted. Another page, another student. The record stated that the student, a female transfer from Howard University, had filed a discrimination complaint after being removed from a summer research group. Cairo blinked. Clark's name was in the recommendation denial form. He began pulling documents faster now. A pattern emerged. Each case slightly different in circumstance but identical in outcome. Accusation, isolation, removal. Some were academic flags. Others were slow freezes, being cut out of labs, denied recommendation letters, quietly labeled as problematic. None of it loud enough to trigger legal scrutiny, all of it designed to wear someone down. He flipped to a manila insert with a pink sticky note still attached. He won't let another one of us through. The handwriting was tight, rushed. It was written directly onto the note. No name. Cairo leaned back in his chair, the words burning into his mind. The next few files listed student withdrawals, quiet exits, no protests. Just students who came in with talent and promise. and left without explanation. He read every page. Not because he wanted to, because he owed them that. And then he found it. Status expelled. Reason: academic dishonesty. Calculus 4. Instructor Dr. Edmund Clark. The date: October 3rd, almost 8 years ago. There was no full case summary attached, only a printed screenshot of the university's decision panel summary. Student claims independent work, no supporting evidence, appeal denied. And then, in light pencil, almost erased, he buried me. Don't let him do it again. Cairo's pulse quickened. He flipped to the last page. There, barely legible, was an old Carleton database printout, with the university's archived student email and the original contact phone number. Most were probably outdated, but it was something. Cairo picked up his phone. His hands hesitated over the keypad. He didn't know what he was stepping into, but he did know what it felt like to be silenced and discarded. He dialed. It rang. Once, twice, 4 times. Then voicemail. But just as he went to hang up, it clicked. A voice. Rough, low, untrusting. Hello? Who's this? My name's Cairo Bennett. I'm a student at Carleton. I think what happened to you, it's happening again. To me. Silence. Then a breath. You found the file, didn't you? Devante said, voice heavier now. I did. Mr. Harold gave it to me. Another pause. Then a low laugh. Not amused. Pain. Man, that old janitor's still trying to fight the good fight. Cairo swallowed. They put me on academic probation. They tried to block me from research. I didn't know this had happened before. Devante's voice steadied. That's the point. They make sure you don't. Cairo sat forward. Why did they expel you? I solved a problem too fast. Sound familiar? Cairo closed his eyes. It was a mirror. They said I cheated. Devante continued. Wouldn't tell me who accused me. Clark told the board my method wasn't taught in class. It wasn't. I taught it to myself. I thought that mattered. It should. Yeah. Well, I lost everything. Transcripts frozen. No credits transferred. I had to start over with nothing. Cairo hesitated. Why didn't you fight back? I tried, but they made it about me, not the math. They dragged my name through every department, called me arrogant, defensive, said I was unstable. Cairo said nothing. Devante sighed. I still got the receipts though. I kept them. Couldn't throw them away. Even when I wanted to. You kept evidence? I've got emails, grade requests, drafts of the appeal. Even a copy of Clark's lecture slides, with the exact method he said wasn't part of his curriculum. Cairo sat up. Can you send it to me? I am. Then come meet me. I'll show you exactly how they break people like us. Cairo ended the call and stared out the dorm window into the dark. But as he turned back toward his desk, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He picked up. We know what you're looking for, Mr. Bennett. Tread carefully. The next day, Cairo boarded the bus that cut across the city toward Southgate Plaza, a half-forgotten strip of weathered retail in the outer loop of the city. His hoodie was up, headphones in, but no music played. He replayed the phone call in his head again and again, not just Devante's voice, but the one that followed. Cold, unnamed, threatening. We know what you're looking for, Mr. Bennett. Tread carefully. He hadn't told anyone, not even Reed. By the time he stepped off the bus, the sky was the color of old concrete, and the plaza buzzed with the quiet fatigue of low-wage survival. Fast food workers on break, security guards leaning against walls, storefront signs flickering from poor wiring. Devante Briggs was waiting in front of a discount electronics store. Older now, late 20s, with sun-worn skin and eyes that had seen too much. He wore a store-issued polo shirt, with his name embroidered above the chest, khakis that didn't fit quite right, and sneakers that had been white once. But his handshake was firm, and his gaze was focused. You made it, Devante said, nodding. Yeah. Devante didn't waste time. Come on. Break room's empty for another 20. They stepped inside, past a row of dusty shelves, and a cashier who barely looked up. The break room smelled like old coffee and microwaved noodles. A crooked wall clock ticked too loudly. Devante shut the door behind them, and pulled a shoebox from the locker with his name scribbled in Sharpie. He placed it on the table between them. Cairo sat, waiting. Devante opened the lid, and began pulling out papers, some folded, some torn, some printed in black and white with fax machine ink. He laid them out like puzzle pieces, Clark got me on a plagiarism claim in fall 2017. He began. Said I copied a limit proof from a grad-level text. Said there's no way someone from Crenshaw High could have solved that independently. Cairo stayed silent, absorbing every word. He slid a printout across the table. An old email from Clark, addressed to the department head. Briggs' work demonstrates irregular development and might merit a closer look. Devante continued. Same pattern. First it was the red ink, then the referrals. I started getting locked out of group projects. Study partners ghosted me. One day I walked into class and my seat was gone. Cairo's jaw clenched. I submitted a defense packet, Devante said, pulling out a yellowed folder. Citations, original drafts, time-stamped work sessions. Didn't matter. Clark told the board I was combative and emotionally unstable. They didn't even let me speak during the final review. He passed over another sheet, the official expulsion letter. Cairo read the words slowly, the language all too familiar. Inconsistencies between academic history and submitted work. Devante leaned back. I tried transferring. No school would take me with a dishonesty flag. My mom called the dean's office every week for 6 months. They stopped answering. Why didn't you go public? Cairo asked quietly. Devante gave a bitter smile. I tried. I wrote an article. Had everything lined up. Documents, names, quotes from other students. Titled it Gatekeeping Genius. He pulled out a folded sheet. It was printed in draft format, with highlighted annotations and a mock-up header. Cairo scanned it quickly. Every paragraph bled with frustration, but also facts, references, patterns, direct quotes. I sent it to 5 college papers, Devante said. 3 ignored it. 2 said it was too accusatory without conclusive proof. 1 editor told me to add a line, thanking the faculty for holding me to high standards. I tore it up. Cairo looked up. But you kept it. Devante nodded. Because I knew one day, someone else would come along. Someone who made the mistake of being brilliant in the wrong body. That line hit Cairo like a punch he couldn't dodge. Devante slid a flash drive across the table. Everything's on here. My full records. My draft article. Recorded Zoom calls with Clark. Even a copy of the appeal letter that mysteriously vanished from the student portal 2 days after I submitted it. You recorded him? Only once. During an office hour. He didn't know. But he said it clear. Talent doesn't always come with integrity. Especially when they've been told they're special too early. Cairo stared at the flash drive. Why now? He asked. Devante met his gaze. Because you're still inside, and because you're not just fighting for you. Cairo ran his hand over the shoebox lid. Do you ever think about going back? Every day, Devante said. But I also know, Clark's still there, and unless someone stops him, I'll just be the first of many. Cairo sat in silence for a long time, then finally said, I want to finish your article. Devante blinked. You wrote Gatekeeping Genius. You laid the blueprint. I can get it published. But this time, we don't ask for permission, we leak it. To student outlets, Twitter, Reddit. Let it spread before they can kill it. Devante watched him, carefully. You're serious? Cairo nodded. Devante leaned in, voice firm. Then take this flash drive, and listen to me, because this is the part no one warns you about. Once you go public, there's no going back. They won't just try to discredit your math, they'll try to rewrite you. I know. They'll say you had an agenda, say you were difficult, say you weren't grateful enough. I know. Devante's voice dropped even lower. They'll come for everything. Cairo stared at the drive in his hand, and smiled, not out of joy, but clarity. Let them try. Devante stood and opened the break room door. As Cairo stepped out into the narrow hallway, his phone buzzed again. A new notification. Preview. Then it's still pushing. We need to manage the narrative before he makes this racial. Cairo sat in the digital media lab. After hours, the glow from the screen casting blue shadows across his face. The flash drive Devante gave him was plugged in, files neatly arranged in labeled folders. Emails, audio, transcripts, drafts, files from Herald. Every click revealed another piece of truth. Another scar buried under faculty smiles and committee jargon. Next to him, Lonnie Cho, senior editor of the Colton Voice, the university's only truly independent student newspaper, leaned in closer as she scrolled through the folder labeled Redacted Cases. Jesus, she whispered. This isn't just a pattern. It's a machine. They'd met just 72 hours earlier, after Cairo sent her a 2-sentence DM. I have something you need to see, and it's bigger than Clark. He had expected hesitation. A cautious pause. But Lonnie responded with one word. When? Now her face hardened with every document she opened. She looked at Cairo. You're sure you want this published?
Yes.
They will come after you. I'm counting on it. He opened Devontae's Word doc, the original draft of Gatekeeping Genius. Together, they rewrote it line by line, weaving Cairo's experience with Devontae's, adding receipts, Clark's internal emails, meeting logs, handwritten accusations, audio snippets. By midnight, the headline was locked. Gatekeeping Genius: How a Tenured Professor Silenced a Generation of Black Excellence at Colton. Below it, a subheading in bold. With never-before-seen documents, testimony, and leaked audio, the Colton Voice investigates Dr. Edmund Clark and what the administration knew all along. They hit publish at 2:11. By 2:15, it had 43 shares. By 3:003, it hit Reddit. By 4:28, someone tweeted a screenshot of the audio transcript. Clark said this about a student. Too confident for where he comes from. How is this man still employed? A Justice Math. By morning, Clark cover-up was trending in 5 cities. Hundreds of quote tweets, thousands of retweets. And soon, the dam broke. Former students began speaking out. A woman from the class of 2012 wrote a thread explaining how Clark had shut down her thesis proposal after she introduced a topic involving African numerical systems. He told me it lacked academic seriousness. A black male from 2015 posted a PDF of his rejection letter for a research assistantship, signed by Clark, and paired it with screenshots of his 4.0 GPA and honors status. Anonymous DMs flooded the Colton Voice. Faculty receipts, study group screenshots, old forum posts. One tweet read, I remember when Clark used to call us diversity hires under his breath. We were 19. We didn't know we could fight back. A invisible scholar. Another. He told me I should consider sociology instead. Because he didn't believe I had the rigor for math. I was top of my class. I quant queen. Each voice added weight. Each post made it harder for the university to look away. By noon, national accounts picked it up. Then bloggers. Then a digital journalist from Vice DM'd Lonnie for quotes. And in the middle of it all, Cairo sat quietly in his dorm, watching the flood unfold. Reed came in halfway through the day, eyes wide. Yo, he said, holding up his phone. You're trending. Cairo barely looked up. Reed sat down. Is it true? All of it. Reed was silent for a beat. You should have told me, man. I did, Cairo said quietly. You just didn't hear me. By late afternoon, the university released a statement. Colton University takes all allegations seriously. We have opened a sensitivity inquiry into the matters raised by recent student publications. No mention of Cairo. No mention of Clark. No apology. Just an investigation. Internal, of course. And beneath the corporate speak, something colder arrived in Cairo's inbox. Subject: Notice of disciplinary hearing. From Office of Student Conduct. Dear Mr. Bennett, you are hereby required to appear before the disciplinary board on Thursday at 9 a.m. Your recent actions, including unauthorized publication of private academic files and breach of university communication policies, may constitute grounds for disciplinary action up to and including expulsion. They weren't just investigating Clark. Cairo read it twice, then pinned it to his dorm wall beneath the headline of Gatekeeping Genius. That night, Devontae called. You okay? I'm expecting to be expelled. Devontae paused. You scared? More like, ready. Devontae exhaled. We're with you. You started something they can't undo. Not even if they come for your record. Not even if they scrub your name. There was a long silence. Then Cairo asked, You think we'll win? Devontae didn't hesitate. We already did. The next morning, as Cairo walked across campus toward the disciplinary office, his phone buzzed. An anonymous tip. Check the administration's Slack channel. Someone just leaked internal messages. He clicked the link. A screenshot popped up. One admin had typed, We need to find a way to protect Clark without making it look racial. Another replied, Let's say it's about tone. Emotional conduct. Professionalism. That always lands better. Cairo didn't smile. He screenshot it and kept walking. The room was colder than usual. Not in temperature. In atmosphere. Cairo stepped into the testing hall with nothing but a pencil, his student ID, and a quiet storm building behind his eyes. No calculator, no notes, no backpack. Clark had made sure of that. At the front of the room, Clark stood with his arms folded, dressed in a dark blazer, and a look of false neutrality painted across his face. Next to him sat two faculty proctors, not math professors, just bodies with clipboards, assigned to ensure procedural fairness. They didn't speak. They didn't smile. They just watched. Cairo's name was already written on the assigned desk in bold marker. Bennett, Cairo, row 1, center, front and center. Always. Clark stepped forward holding a thick stack of papers. The final exam printed on blank paper. No school header, no digital ID tag. He set one in front of each student, with the care of someone delivering verdicts, not questions. When he reached Cairo's desk, he paused, just long enough for the moment to stretch. This version was handwritten last night, Clark said quietly. To ensure academic purity. Cairo didn't respond. You'll have 1 hour, Clark added, stepping back. Begin. The exam was brutal by design. It wasn't a test of curriculum. It was a test of obedience, of endurance, of silence. The first problem was a triple integral, with boundary variables that looped into a convergence trap. The second, a limit proof that required transforming the equation before it could be simplified. The kind of problem Clark never taught, but had used to fail students before. Cairo read each problem once, then again. Then, methodically, like a skeletal, he began to write. No hesitation. No crossed-out work, just motion. His pencil moved in rhythm, carving through each equation with surgical precision. 30 minutes passed, then 40. And as others around him fidgeted, rewrote, stared off in confusion, Cairo reached the final problem. A theoretical prompt asking for the optimization of a non-linear system. Unsolvable, without recognizing its hidden symmetry. He solved it in 3 steps, then stopped. 40 minutes total. He set his pencil down, hands calm. The room was silent except for the scratching of rushed pencils and the occasional sigh of defeat. Cairo stood. Clark looked up sharply. I'm finished, Cairo said. Clark checked the clock. You still have 20 minutes. I won't need them. He walked to the front, set the exam on Clark's desk, and returned to his seat, not to leave, but to watch. Clark stared at the paper, then picked it up. He flipped to the first page. His eyes moved across the solution. Slow at first, then faster. His lips tightened. His hand gripped the paper just slightly. He turned to the next page, and the next, and the final one. Silent. Even the proctors were looking now. Curious. Cairo didn't blink. He watched Clark read each line as if it were a confession he wasn't ready for. Because what sat in front of him wasn't just a correct test. It was a masterpiece. Cairo hadn't just solved the problems. He had rewritten 2 of them to make them cleaner, stronger. One equation had a footnote suggesting an alternate proof method. Another had been reframed using an elegant symmetry Clark himself had once published in an obscure journal. He couldn't even deny it. It was too correct, too familiar, too good. Clark's hand began to tremble. Not dramatically, just a small betrayal in his fingers. He looked up. Their eyes met, and in that quiet, bitter distance, Clark saw the truth. Not that Cairo had won, but that Clark had never stood a chance. His voice barely left his throat, but the words slipped out anyway, a whisper meant for no one, but caught by the quiet. He's better than me. No one else heard it, but Cairo did, and that was enough. Not revenge, but proof. He didn't need vindication. He had become undeniable, and now, Clark had no more shadows to hide behind. Back inside the exam hall, Clark sat alone. He looked down at Cairo's paper again, then reached for his red pen. Because beneath the final problem, in small, careful handwriting, Cairo had left a note. You tried to erase me, so I rewrote the problem instead. Clark dropped the pen, and for the first time in his long, smug career, he had no answer. The official announcement came buried inside a Friday afternoon press release. Carleton University places Professor Edmund Clark on indefinite administrative leave, pending further investigation. No apology, no mention of systemic bias, just carefully chosen words meant to sound like action, while shielding legacy. The students knew better. The faculty knew better. And Cairo, he'd stopped hoping for honesty from official language. What mattered was this: his record was cleared. The academic probation removed. The competition results reinstated. The transcript edited. The asterisk that had been quietly added to his file, now gone. On paper, It looked like everything had been made right. But Cairo knew better than anyone. Clean records didn't erase dirty battles. In the weeks that followed, classmates who once ignored him now nodded in passing. Some offered timid apologies, most didn't. One emailed him anonymously. Sorry for not speaking up. I was scared too. The university offered Cairo counseling, optional housing credit, and a semester stipend. A student-led petition circulated to rename the math building, and gained traction, but quietly stalled when trustees refused to entertain the conversation. Then came the part that almost felt cruel. The university's advancement office contacted Cairo directly. After everything you've endured, the administration would like to offer you a scholarship, said the voice over the phone. Full tuition until graduation. Cairo blinked. Skeptical. What's the catch? No catch. It's part of a new initiative. We're calling it the Clark Future Scholars Fund, to honor Professor Clark's decades of contributions while also promoting student excellence moving forward. Silence. Then Cairo said, You want me to take a scholarship in his name? It's more symbolic than literal. I don't need symbolism, Cairo said. I needed protection when he targeted me. I needed accountability. You didn't give me that. The voice hesitated. We're trying to make amends. Cairo's voice dropped, cool and clear. Then don't offer me his money. Offer me a platform. The call ended with no commitment. But 2 days later, he received another email, this time from the Office of Student Affairs. Subject: invitation to speak at fall orientation. Body: we believe your voice would inspire incoming students. We'd like you to speak at the freshman orientation ceremony, as a symbol of perseverance and integrity. At first he almost deleted it, but something in him paused. Perseverance and integrity. 2 words they were only using now, after trying so hard to bury him. Still, the idea lingered. He thought about Devante, about Mr. Harold. Maybe this wasn't for them. Maybe it was for the ones still coming. The ones who didn't yet know how dangerous brilliance could be when worn in black skin. Cairo walked the campus differently now. Not with swagger, not with defiance, but with clarity. People looked at him, not with pity anymore, but curiosity. A mix of reverence and discomfort. He had become a story they whispered about between lectures. The boy who beat the system. The math kid who took down a tenured professor. But no one saw the nights he couldn't sleep. The missed internship emails that never came back. The research opportunity that had quietly gone to someone else during his probation. The friendships that cracked under the pressure of proximity. The months of waking up, wondering if all of it had been worth it. Because truth was, even victory came with wounds, and not all of them healed neatly. One afternoon he met with Devante again. This time at a small cafe halfway between campus and the city. They sat by the window, no shoebox between them this time. Devante sipped his tea and smiled. They offered me a meeting with the board. Said they'd review my expulsion. Cairo raised an eyebrow. Are they reinstating your degree? Devante chuckled. Nah, just performing restorative outreach. New buzzword. Are you gonna go? I might. Not for me. For the ones who come next. Cairo nodded slowly. You changed the conversation. Devante added. I don't want to be a conversation, Cairo said. I want to be a blueprint. Devante leaned in, voice low. Then speak. At that orientation, make sure your name gets etched into the ground they walk on. Let them know someone like you stood here. Fought. Didn't fold. Cairo looked out the window. Beyond the horizon, the campus building stood tall, still bearing names of donors, old scholars, and quiet villains. But maybe, just maybe, the next student who walked past them wouldn't feel so alone. That night, Cairo received another email from a student he'd never met. A freshman who had read the Gatekeeping Genius article online and found his contact info. The message was short. I was gonna drop out before classes even started. Thought I didn't belong. Then I read your story. Now I know I do. Thank you. Cairo read it twice, then turned off the screen and began drafting his speech. The night before orientation, Cairo received one final message. A screenshot. Clark, photographed stepping into a private building downtown. The caption. He's not gone. He's just been reassigned. Admin consulting. New title, higher pay. Same silence. Cairo stared at the screen and felt the fire return to his chest. It wasn't over. Not yet. The auditorium smelled of polished wood, paper programs, and nervous energy. Freshmen in crisp outfits clustered in the front rows, their eyes bright with possibility. Behind them sat skeptical upperclassmen, quiet faculty, and a few parents blinking in the late afternoon sun. Cameras lined the stage, cell phones, official recorders, the university's press crew. Cairo stood backstage, watching the crowd murmur beneath the soft lighting. A single spotlight hung on his lectern, waiting. He smoothed the notes on the podium, though he had already memorized every line. His breath was calm, outwardly relaxed, inwardly charged like a dry fuse, waiting for permission to ignite. The assistant dean stepped to the mic, introduced him with ceremonial hesitation. Then, just like Dr. Clark had done months ago, only this time, the words carried weight, not weaponized doubt. Cairo stepped onto the stage. He paused at the edge, looked out, and let the silence settle. Then he spoke. "Don't waste my time." The auditorium tensed, not in expectation, but in recognition. His voice echoed, crisp against the hush. The phrase carried memory, sharp and unyielding, but now, it was his to reclaim. He paused again and whispered, softer but clear, "Because time is the only thing you can't get back after someone tries to steal your future." Gasps echoed. Not because he had yelled, because he had spoken truth. He continued, voice steady. "I'm not standing here just for me. I'm standing here for Devante, for every student erased by suspicion, for every file, every dismissed solution, every whisper claiming we didn't belong when we did, and still do." The freshman leaned forward. Some upperclassmen shifted uncomfortably. He looked at faculty, then out at rows of students, many of whom had never heard his name before today. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was laying claim. Genius doesn't look like one thing, but racism always does. Nothing moved. Then, breaking over the room like a wave. Applause. Quiet, honest, proud. The dean blinked. Faculty shifted in chairs. Some nodded. Some rubbed their hands, not sure what had just been revealed. Cairo let it wash over him for a moment. "To the institution that offered me a scholarship in the name of the man who tried to break me. Here's my answer. No. Not until we change how we define success. Not until we dismantle systems that mistake brilliance for threat." That line landed, deep and crisp. The applause grew, not polite perfunctory feigning, but real. Cairo looked toward the back door of the auditorium. Through the crowd, hidden behind a column, stood Mr. Harold, the janitor who'd handed him the file. His hood was pulled low, but his eyes brimmed with quiet pride. Harold nodded once, then slipped away as silently as he'd appeared. Cairo watched him go, then turned back to the audience. "To every one of you just starting out, don't let them define who you can be. And if they try, outwork them, outlast them. Be undeniable." Cairo held his hand steady on the podium. This was not a conclusion. It was the start. Once the applause subsided, Cairo stepped off the stage into the hallway. The assistant dean approached him, eyes wide. "That was powerful." Cairo nodded. As he passed by a mirrored wall, he saw someone enter. Dr. Edmund Clark, head down, flanked by two administrators. They paused just out of view. Clark looked up, saw Cairo framed in the glass, and for a breath recognition flickered behind his eyes. Then, the unexpected twist. Clark's lips curved, not into regret but something measured. A handshake line forming. His eyes locked with Cairo's reflection, and he mouthed almost inaudibly, "If you've ever been judged before you were heard, you know this pain. Type yes if you believe silence is no longer an option. Subscribe if this broke your heart and you're silent."